Hello, welcome to Helping Leaders Achieve What Matters. My name is Mark Taylor, and today on our show we have Jonathan B. Smith. Jonathan is an entrepreneur, he's a business strategist, he's an author, and an expert EOS implementer. He's worked with 125 plus high growth entrepreneurial companies and 1,000 plus sessions to help them improve strategy, execution, and results. He's also a negotiations trainer with the Black Swan Group, which is what we're going to talk about today. And he works closely with former FBI Hostage Negotiator Chris Voss, who is the author of one of my favorite books, Never Split the Difference. Jonathan's also an advisory board member for the International Spy Museum. Welcome to our podcast, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mark. Terrific to see you.
It's great to see you too. So our podcast is for CEOs of small to medium-sized companies, generally with 25 to 500 employees, doing revenues between 10 and 500 million. Talking to that audience, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that CEOs and business owners make when it comes to negotiation?
Well, the biggest issue in terms of negotiation, what we like to talk about is tactical empathy. And what we like to talk about is negotiation and not bargaining. So what we're trying to do is get a win-win negotiation for both parties. And I see when people can't actually hear what the other party's saying, they don't actually understand where they're coming from. They don't have a sense of tactical empathy, and they end up at an impasse and emotional. That gets in the way of making a great deal.
Yes, I remember talking with Chris when we had dinner with him about tactical empathy. And what surprised me is, how do you have empathy for he was an FBI negotiator. I mean, he's negotiating with the bad guys. It seems almost like, I don't know, ironic to have empathy for somebody that you may find personally disgusting.
Well, empathy doesn't mean you have to agree.
Okay.
But when we say empathy, it's that you observe or you have an intuition about someone, and then you make a verbalization of that observation. So you make a verbal, so it's intuition plus verbal observation equals tactical empathy. It doesn't mean you agree, but it can mean like, hey, seems like when we got on the call here, I said, you seem pretty happy, and it seems like you were just on vacation. You're like, of course, I was just in Portugal and in Spain.
Yes.
So that is a verbal observation. When I used a label there, seems like you're pretty happy and you must have just been on vacation.
So doing that is like a way of connecting with me. That's what you mean by tactical empathy.
Yeah, because you feel heard. You didn't even tell me you were on vacation, but all of a sudden it's almost like a Jedi mind trick that I somehow could see that you were a little different. It didn't seem like you had just come out of 5 days of Vistage talks or Vistage meetings. You were somehow a little lighter on your feet and smilier.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Although I would like to think I leave my 5 days of Vistage meetings feeling happy because I love what I do. So I've heard you talk about having the other person having the feeling that they were heard. And I've heard you talk about how important listening is. Can you say more about listening and the skill of listening and how that could help CEOs?
Yeah, so there are actually, we say there's 5 levels of listening. And so the first level is listening, and it's sort of listening for the gist. I say, like, you could be on your iPhone and listening and go like, like that doesn't feel like you're listening at all, but you could listen for the gist. Now, you could also be in a meeting and just be listening to respond. You could tell the person like leans in and they're like, I'm going to listen, and I'm not really listening. I'm just listening so I can respond. As soon as they're done, I'm going to respond. Where you can actually stay is this third level, which is listening to understand. So have a better understanding of their logic, of where they're coming from. So I have a mantra called stay curious. And in stay curious, the idea is you're listening to understand. Can you actually listen to understand where they're coming from? The fourth level is listening for emotion. So do you actually understand what emotionally is going on for them besides just the fact of what's the logic, but you can actually understand what's going on emotionally for them? And then the fifth is listening for their point of view. Like what's really going on in their world, which means you have to logically understand, you have to emotionally understand, and then all of a sudden you have to like understand their point of view, whether you agree with it or not. In tactical empathy, we're talking about how do you listen to really understand their point of view. If you read Never Split the Difference and you read about the Chase Manhattan Bank takedown, you know, and Chris goes through this and actually talks about what that person's point of view is and how they're going to get out of the bank, or what are they thinking? Why do they need a car? What do they think is going to actually happen? And actually verbalize that and have a conversation to the point where they get a successful release of the hostages and a successful negotiation.
So that sounds hard to listen on all five of these levels. How do you develop that skill?
You can't stay in 5 and you can't stay in 4. You can try. So like the goal is to stay in 3. So listening to understand. And the issue is, like the trap is listening to respond. When you're sitting there and like, oh, I just want to get my point of view out there. I just want to get my point of view out there. Just want to get my point of view out there. They're not actually going to feel heard. But if you can actually listen to understand where they're coming from or their logic, that's probably as good as we can do. And then we can go into listening for emotion. You know, there are times where we can do that. And then the ideal is listening for their point of view. Like, what's their worldview and why are they coming to that conclusion? And if they understand that you understand where they're coming from and they feel heard, you're much more likely to have a good outcome.
I think there would be a lot of pauses in my listening as I then have to kind of take that all in and think about it, which I'm doing right now. And then would you respond with some sort of like what you started with, like an observation? Like, it looks like this is pretty important to you, or it seems like this is serious.
Yeah, so like one of the go-to labels. So a label starts with typically it seems like, sounds like, feels like, looks like. So you're labeling something. It would be like, seems like you've thought a lot about this.
Yes.
And then you just drop dynamic silence and you wait for the person to respond. And they're like, that's one of our go-to labels. It means it works in almost any scenario. But you have it, and the negotiation skills we teach are depreciable. So they go away if you don't practice. It's like your fitness goes away if you don't go to the gym or you don't work out. So the same is true with negotiations. It's literally a way of life. It's not just, we're going to give you a book and then you can go execute it. It's one of the things we like to say, you know, I know you said you just got back from Spain and Portugal, is like the best way to learn tactical empathy is through immersion. Literally use it all the time doing low stakes practice.
Well, it seems like as a CEO and a business owner, I would have that opportunity, you know, 24/7, because I can not only do it at the office with my key executives and my direct reports, but I could do it at home with my spouse and family, right?
What we teach is a communication. So negotiation is the negotiation we teach is a way of life in terms of how we communicate with other humans. The issue is when you're anxious and you're like, oh, I feel tight on my cash flow, or someone just quit and I'm really upset, or I just had a bad conversation with one of my important clients, and then someone walks in the room and you just tell them what you need to have done as opposed to listening to why they walked in the room. That's really where the disconnect is. Like, how do you know? I had this example the other night. We were at dinner. The lettuce came out was different lettuce than we had had in the past. I asked the manager to come over. Wasn't trying to get a free food. I was just like, this is not the same lettuce that we would normally have. And like, I failed to use the skills in terms of talking to her. I got we ended up getting they took the charge off, but really I was like, oh, there was an opportunity to miss the skills. Seems like you're having trouble with this lettuce. Seems like I'm not the first one to complain that this lettuce didn't taste like what you had last week. So I didn't really have a conversation with her. I more just she came over and said, here, I'll take the money off the bill.
So every time you say seems like, does your wife go, stop that. I don't want to hear that anymore.
A lot of times people don't know you're doing it. So it seems like, sounds like, looks like, feels like is, 4 ways to start with a label. And, one of the things that we say is you can't sound coached. You have to walk into one of these negotiations and in fact just sound natural, not coached. So that's one of the things, like, it has to be you. So as long as it's you, it doesn't usually get called out to the same degree. I've had someone who, a friend of mine did 4 or 5 mirrors, which is saying the last 1 to 3 words of the sentence someone said. And he did it 4 times in a row. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Why do you keep using mirrors on me and calling out the behavior as opposed to, just having a conversation?
So he stopped.
He stopped because I called him out and I'm like, yeah, I see what you're trying to do. But the mirror is not the right technique or not the right skill at that moment.
Now, what would you say is different in like a high stakes negotiation? I mean, you mentioned you have to kind of check your own attitude or your own mindset going into it. If I just had something that was, if I just had an argument with an employee or lost a big customer, it might not be the right mindset to go into a negotiation. What would you do about that? What do you have to say about mindset?
So one of the things with high stakes negotiation, we actually have a whole class called caviar. And caviar, the idea is if you're going to go into a high stakes situation and a high tension, we want you to actually vent. So the V in caviar is to vent. You have to vent with someone else. So like, since you and I can tell you my partner in New York City and the business that we do with EOS and Vistage, and I was going into a difficult situation, I might call you and vent with you and say, okay, so here's all the bad things I want to say, because I don't want to say them when I, in fact, get on the call with this important client or have this meeting with this important client. Because the reality is I want to stick to staying curious and using tactical empathy to, in fact, come up with an outcome that works for all parties. So mindset's really important. Walking in and saying, walking in and thinking you're going to go into a fight versus walking in thinking, I'm going to intentionally think that I'm going to come up with an outcome that works for all parties. Like, mindset really matters.
So it sounds like you're setting an intention. You have to have some self-awareness to be aware of your own state, your own mood. And if you notice that you are carrying some resentment or anger, that you should vent beforehand. What else?
I mean, you should be prepared for the negotiation. So we have a negotiation 1 sheet, which is on the Black Swan website, that actually helps you prepare. So it would say, here are the go-to labels that you might use. We have a bunch of different skills. Here's how I might use these skills in this negotiation and actually prepare for the negotiation before you show up. Not to sound coached, but to just be prepared for what you can expect.
Got it. How do you know when to walk away? What are the signs that, this isn't going anywhere? I mean, I'm still upset over this writer's strike that seems to be taking forever, but I don't really know the details behind it. I mean, obviously they decided to walk away, or maybe both sides did.
Well, so when you ask me that question, the first thing that comes to mind is we say there's 2 kinds of people that we're dealing with. They are either easy, lucrative, and fun. So easy, lucrative, and fun, ELF, or hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. And so I can label two parties, like from the beginning, when you start talking to someone the first time and go, are they easy, lucrative, and fun? Would I want to have them? Would I want to work for them with them for the next 2 years? Or do I think they're going to create chaos in my life? So if they're a half, I walk away. If they're elf, we continue onward. So that's Joe Polish actually came up with that idea. He's a marketer, and Chris is in his program. And then we have a proof of life. So proof of life literally says, am I the favorite or am I the fool? So I want to know, are you calling me because you expect to do business with me, or are you calling me because you think you need a third bid to verify the first bid or the person who you expect to work with? So like literally we would ask that question, like, so how'd you decide to have me on the bidder list? And I've gotten clients to the point where they ask these difficult questions and they don't waste their time bidding on, let's say, if they're in construction with GCs that they've had bad experiences with in the past, who don't pay their bills on time, or, don't follow the right procedures, or blame them when something goes wrong, or as opposed to working together as a team to build it together.
I mean, that sounds good if you have a choice, but what about in situations, union situations in particular, where, I mean, you don't really have a choice? When do you know when to call off the negotiations, or what do you do in those type of situations?
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to someone about the UPS negotiation, did the whole analysis of the UPS negotiation, and I looked at it. With that negotiation actually was more political. So they had like two new CEOs, like someone running the union and someone running UPS. And they both had to prove they had done something for their constituents. And I said, oh, this is actually a political negotiation. It's less financial. Some of it was financial, but it was certainly financially motivated. But I didn't expect them to actually strike because I thought it was in the best interest of everyone to continue together. So that was interesting to actually work on it in the beginning of July and then watch them settle. The writer strike, I don't know the details of the writer strike. I don't know, I think they're in a pretty tenuous situation with what's going on with AI and streaming media, and the way that things have changed in terms of, like, there's no great syndicated shows anymore the way they were in the past, and funds aren't there in the same way. So I don't know all the details of that, but clearly, they seem to be pretty far apart because the actors aren't getting paid and the studios aren't producing new content. And it seems like I've read the story, the studios continue to make money by just rerunning old shows. So I don't know how to get them back to the table, but clearly the actors feel like they haven't had a good enough deal offered to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So when do you walk away? What are the signs that you walk away?
I mean, me personally, it's literally easy, lucrative, and fun, or hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. In the FBI, Chris had, so it was really interesting. They used to think they could negotiate any deal, like in the early 80s, and then they had a terrible situation where all the hostages got killed. And I don't remember the exact incident, but what they realized was 7% of the time, the hostage taker is going to kill the hostages. And they needed to determine when to call SWAT in, because that person was hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, and when they could continue to use their skills to come to a negotiated release of the hostages. So sometimes I say, like, there are 7%, are we just not going to get a deal done there? They're hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. I don't know the exact point where you get and you say this isn't going to work, but that's really what you need to know. You really need to know, are you the favorite or are you the fool? And can you actually get a deal done that's worth getting done? I've had a lot of clients, and you've probably had this too, Mark, where clients are like, any business is good business.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not making, we know that, like, you won the business, the margins aren't there. You're not going to be able to do change orders to make up for the margins. They're not going to pay you in a timely manner. You have limited resources to actually deliver the services, so it's going to take away from more profitable business. Like, why wouldn't you walk away at that point? And I think previous generations, like a lot of times my clients' parents would have taken any business they could. And I'm like, let's use the right filter to say what's target market and what does it look like. And let's say, no, here's our terms. This is what we need to do to work together. And if we're gonna work in a contentious situation, we just don't want to do that business. And I've had a lot of clients be very successful with that formula.
And would you say that like in a negotiation, like, I'm getting the feeling that things are, I don't know if I'd use the word lame, but difficult here. And it doesn't look like there's going to be any resolution. Maybe it doesn't make sense to continue.
Yeah, so we have a skill called an accusations audit. And an accusations audit is you will literally say the things that you think are on the other person's mind about you. So you're trying to neutralize what they have in their mind. So you might say, I'll give you a couple examples. You could use a list of like 7 to 15 items and you just keep saying them. You think I'm greedy. You think I'm too expensive. You think I'm being unreasonable. And you would say these things. And then we have this laws of negotiation gravity, which says that the urge to correct is irresistible. So if I say something and it's wrong, you're going to correct me. Say, no, I don't think you're greedy. I think you're a good business person. I think you're trying to make a deal that works, and so you can pay your people and you can make a fair profit. Or they could say, yeah, I think you're totally greedy. Your number's way off. So, and this is really hard to do initially, like unless you're trained, because you're like, I'm going to tell them what I think they're thinking. And you'd think, oh, I'm going to give something away. And the reality is they're already thinking it. So it's like, I say it's like noise canceling. You're literally canceling the negative emotion so you can go have a proper conversation. And ideally, they would tell you, yeah, price is the most important thing. And that's what we care about. We don't care about quality and we don't care about time and timely delivery. Or no, price is not the most important thing, but here's what I need to get done in order to improve the price. Or here's my limitation. So this accusations audit is a super duper powerful tool. Hard to do unless you practiced it.
Yeah, it sounds like a great tool. Where would you learn more about that?
You could search on Google just put accusations audit into Google and it'll show up the Black Swan Group. There's a bunch of blog posts there. That would be helpful.
Well, speaking of Google, it's the information age, and we do so much of our communication not in person. I mean, I always, old school, you never negotiated unless you were face to face. But with, email, Zoom, social media, what would you say about how negotiation works now?
Yeah, there's definitely opportunity. I mean, negotiation again is communication. So all of those elements are communication. And the reality is the skills are applicable in text, in email, etc. Not just on the phone or in person. A lot of times we just have to be shorter with the skill. So we can't put like full accusations audit necessarily into a text. Like a text needs to be short so it's appropriate for that context. But I certainly will use labels and summaries and accusations audit. It's hard to hear tone tone is hard in text or an email, but so you got to be very careful in terms of how your tone may come off. But tactical empathy actually helps you because now you're saying, it seems like you're under the gun to get this deal done. Drop it. And if it was in text, you can expect to get a response. If you don't get a response, that's a response. Also, that's the other thing. People think, oh, I didn't get a response. Well, you didn't get the response that you wanted. You got a response. No response is a response.
So you wouldn't avoid using email to negotiate, but would you use it as more of a last resort? Like in-person first, Zoom second, email third.
Well, sometimes you have to negotiate just to get to the table.
Well, that's
Like,
true.
it's hard to negotiate an entire term sheet on text. I would not suggest that. I would not suggest doing that on email if in a perfect world. But the idea would be you just have to appropriately use the negotiation and figure out what the next step is. Like, what's the next best step in the negotiation? Because that's the other thing I've learned is that got to be really patient with negotiations. Can't force the negotiation. You have because if you're going to listen for logic or listen for emotion or listen for their point of view, it often takes what appears from the beginning to be longer, which actually is probably shorter. It's the fastest way to come to an outcome, but it feels like, oh, I just want to like talk to the guy, tell him in 5 minutes, this is what I want, and decide if we make a deal. And that actually often stands in the way of using tactical empathy, because then you're not really listening, you're just telling.
So you're doing a workshop for us, for our Vistage members coming up. What can you tell us? What are they going to learn in that workshop in 2.5 hours?
Yeah, so what I really want to do, as I told you, it's tactical empathy is a way of life. Negotiation is a way of life. It's all about communication. Like, what we can do is we can teach you about mindset, because I think we start with mindset. If we just learned listening, like whenever I do a workshop with you, Mark, I just want the members to walk away with 2 or 3 things that they can try. Because what we need them to do is do low stakes practice. Low stakes practice to us means like you could be at Starbucks and use the skills. I have a whole thing with the barista who takes care of me, who I now fist bump every time I see him because I use the skills with him and ask him how his grandmother's and his barbecue was on Sunday. Because I now have a relationship with him, whereas before it was transactional. So my hope is that we do mindset, we do listening, because every one of your groups should be aware of their listening.
Yes.
And then we'll do a couple of I'll show you some of the skills. I'll show you like probably 3 of the basic skills that you can walk out of and actually start using those skills. And then we'll role play some of the skills in session, because it's using the skills is not natural.
This sounds like a workshop that they shouldn't miss. I know I'm looking forward to it. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I always like to say, stay curious. Very hard to stay curious. And I always, I really am a fan of the mindset issue, which is like, I'm going to have a great outcome. We're going to have a mutually beneficial outcome. And the second thing is, beware when you're listening to respond. It's such a natural human emotion to just want to respond and be right. If you just listen more, you'll have better outcomes.
And for people that can't make it to this workshop, how can they learn more about you, about Black Swan, about negotiation?
So certainly they could read Never Split the Difference. BlackSwanLTD.com is where is our website. So www.blackswanltd.com. And you can certainly find me on LinkedIn, although my last name is Smith. So my LinkedIn name is the number 4G. So if you look at O4G, Jonathan Smith O4G on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. This has been insightful. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person. This is Helping Leaders Achieve What Matters. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Mark.